glamorous woman boarded a totally empty Paris Metro carriage. 45 seconds later, our heroine was found bleeding to death with a dagger sticking out of her neck.
Laetitia Toureaux, factory worker, paramour, and the chicest thing of all, the spy. Leticia's most dangerous assignment, infiltrating a terrorist group. The Paris police closed the case as officially unsolved.
Laetitia Toureaux played a deadly game.
Turned out that Leticia had been juggling many a knife, but which one ended up killing her?
I'm Suruti.
I'm Hannah.
And welcome to RedHanded. On a drizzly evening in spring 1937, a glamorous woman in a chic green suit boarded a totally empty Paris Metro carriage. Just 45 seconds later, the train pulled into the next station, and our heroine was found bleeding to death in her seat with a 9-inch dagger sticking out of her neck. But her assassin was nowhere to be seen. It was as if a ghost had struck in the dark tunnels beneath the City of Light.
So how and why had Laetitia Toureaux met her grisly end? The deeper the investigators dug, the more layers of intrigue they would uncover. Beneath the surface of this well-liked, respectable young widow lay a woman with many faces. Factory worker, paramour, and secret agent.
Yeah.
How many legs does she have?
As far as I know, 2.
Okay, well then she's not as good. But she did have an adventurous life that took her into the tangled web of espionage, extreme political movements, and far-right terrorism that was brewing at the heart of interwar France. And it turned out that Leticia had been juggling many a knife before her death. But which one ended up killing her?
It was a locked-room mystery that utterly bamboozled the Parisian police, whipping the reading public into a frenzy with lurid headlines of sexual romps and backstabbing galore, splashed all over the news. And nearly a century later, the infamous murder on the Metro case still remains officially unsolved. Perhaps because France's elite want it kept that way.
Before her untimely demise, Laetitia Toureaux seemed to be living la belle vie in Paris. She was a 29-year-old Italian immigrant, known for her radiant smile, warm personality, and enterprising nature. Determined to rise from her humble origins and make something of herself through hard work and play. Working in a glue factory by day, Leticia moonlighted after dark at Paris's vibrant dance halls, known as bal musette. There, she checked coats, flirted with patrons, and danced cheek to cheek to the sound of wheezing accordions and clinking glasses. She was known by friends and acquaintances on the nightlife scene as Yolanda. Whether that was just a friendly nickname or a more calculated alias, we don't really know, but slow down. Don't get ahead of yourself.
On the surface, Leticia's final day on Earth was fairly unremarkable. Sunday the 16th of May 1937 was Pentecost Sunday, which meant no work on Monday for Laetitia Toureaux and her fellow working-class Parisians. True to her busy bee nature, Leticia had filled the day with plenty of activities. That morning, her younger brother Riton popped round to her modest apartment in Paris's 20th arrondissement. He didn't come empty-handed, bringing a stylish green skirt and jacket that their mum, a talented seamstress, had made especially for Leticia.
Since her husband died 2 years before, Leticia had mainly worn widow's black, but curiously, not on today. She stepped out onto the Rue Pierre Bailly an hour or so later in her chic new outfit, accessorizing her striking green suit with a white hat, handbag and gloves, as well as high heels, a fur stole, and a pretty parasol. She wore her old engagement ring, as always, engraved with her and her late husband's initials and their wedding date. Leticia chose to top off the look with a distinctive red and black lapel pin. It indicated her membership of a prestigious left-wing public service organisation called Ligue Républicaine de Bien Public, which means Republican League for the Public Good, and we will come back to it.
So that day, the siblings went for a cheeky little aperitif at a local bistro before nipping into Leticia's hairdresser, where she did the second thing that was slightly out of the ordinary that day. She had her dark brown hair lightened to blonde, which is a bold move.
Hey man, the younger you look, the lighter your hair, as I'm learning, because I'm haggard!
That's not true. I have heard that the shorter you cut your hair,
the older you look.
Oh, I heard the younger you look. My hair's just totally fucking out of control. I just look at it and I'm like, what are we doing today?
I feel like the day I decide that I'm not going to have long hair is like, I'm old. It's over.
Sure.
Why are you trying?
Just a little bonnet. See, at least in the summer I could just wear a hat everywhere and no one questioned it.
You do that anyway.
It's not very chic. No. It's hard to look chic in a baseball cap. What other kind of hat can I wear? I tried to wear that hat when we went to Bali and I looked ridiculous.
Oh, I like the Death on the Nile hat.
So yes, she dyes her hair blonde. And then the pair ate lunch at their mum's apartment. joined by their older brother Virgil. As for the afternoon, Leticia planned to test the theory of whether blondes really do have more fun. So Leticia and her brother Riton took a taxi to a bal musette called Le Mitage with their neighbour, a young tailor called Maurice Cagoule. Between 3 and 5 p.m, Leticia, by all accounts, had a gay old time at the bal, spinning around the dance floor with several men and women, including her friend Marceau Marneffe and his little sister Pierrette. At around 5 p.m, Leticia told her pals she intended to nip home soon to freshen up before her evening plans. She went to have dinner with her big brother Virgil and his father-in-law at a local restaurant before attending a swanky banquet organised by the Union Volatile, a respected organisation for Italian immigrants in Paris. At 6 p.m. sharp, Leticia asked the leader of the orchestra to pass on a message to her brother Riton that she was going, leaving the smoky air and accordion trills behind her as she stepped out onto the dusky Paris streets. She was, whether she knew it or not, walking towards her doom.
The weather that day was unseasonably hot, but with a storm creeping in. As Leticia walked briskly to a nearby bus stop, the heavens opened. Hopping on the bus at 6:19 p.m, Leticia took a 3-minute journey to the Port Charenton metro station and hurried inside. The station was full of picnickers from the nearby park, seeking shelter from the rain. Leticia broke from the crowd and entered the first-class carriage alone at 6:25 p.m, while her fellow passengers crammed into the second-class cars. Witnesses would later describe seeing Leticia's distinctive figure in her white-brimmed hat and green suit framed in the window, sitting on a bench facing the front of the train. She was, according to all present that day, completely alone in the carriage as the train set off on its journey along Metro Line 8.
What happened inside that first-class carriage while it rumbled through the underground labyrinth of Paris for the next minute is a mystery. But, thanks to witness testimony, we know the following facts, more or less for certain. The train departed Port Charenton, the first station on the line, at 6:27 p.m, and it arrived at the next station, Port Doré, less than a minute later. As the train idled at the platform, 2 parties boarded the first-class carriage. The first group entered by the front set of doors, closest to where Leticia had been sat down. They were a military dentist named Major Raymond de Bruyere, his fiancée, and her brother, who were all dressed in their finery on the way to the theatre. The second group to board this first-class carriage was a trio of sex workers, scoping for rich sugar daddies in first class.
That's where they are.
There was Elizabeth Guy and Mary Canton, who were English, and Yvette Bailey, who was French. These good time gals entered via the doors at the rear of the carriage. They all noticed the elegant woman in the white hat slumped forward in her seat, and most likely assumed that she'd simply nodded off. But then Leticia slid with a horrible thud to the floor.
As Major Debris rushed to the stranger's aid, he noticed a dagger protruding from her neck and a pool of blood slowly oozing down the slick carriage floor. His medical training meant that he instantly recognised that the victim's jugular vein had been severed. But did Major Debris stick around to try and help? No. And as they say in France, il a filé le ongle, which means he left English style, aka unceremoniously ghosting the scene, which is an expression coined back in the 1800s as a response to the English phrase taking French leave, which means rudely exiting a party without saying goodbye.
You can't just flip it back. You can't just flip
They do it all the fucking time.
Of course you can. It's fucking lame. If we've already been saying French exit, you can't just then be like the English way. That's lame. Grow up. We had it first.
I do strongly recommend, if you don't already, taking up the Irish goodbye. I think I've saved a year of my life.
Totally.
By just leaving.
So much more mysterious as well.
Major Debris and his party ducked out of there like bats out of hell. He later told the press, after they'd laboriously tracked him down, that he knew there was nothing they could do for Leticia and his priority was protecting his fiancée from the inevitable scandal of being embroiled in a brutal murder.
He leaves and he's just like, didn't want to upset my fiancée or get her messed up in any of this. And also, we had a theatre show to get to. Like, are you kidding? But like, he doesn't even raise the alarm. And I get it. He was like, she's dead. But it is quite weird to just be like, meh.
But it was obviously of the utmost importance that he got home and changed his bloody shirt in time for the theatre.
Sure.
And while that might all sound very suspicious and is definitely more than a bit callous, it's not actually that surprising given bourgeois societal values. As we'll come on to learn, Laetitia Toureaux had far bigger foes lurking in the shadows than a military dentist on his way to a night at the theatre. But let's get back to the scene.
After our runaway dentist and his party made their English/French/Irish exit, the group of sex workers leaned closer to see what all the fuss was about. Once they saw this woman was on the floor with a fucking knife sticking out of her neck and blood all over the place, they swiftly started screaming the house down. The alarm was finally raised, and chaos swept through the platform at Port d'Oreille. The conductor, who'd been doing his rounds in another carriage, halted the train from departing. He attempted to quell the rising panic by ushering passengers off the train, as well as blocking new arrivals from entering. Meanwhile, someone fetched a policeman who was patrolling the street above to attend to the victim. As Agent Isambard knelt beside Laetitia Toureaux, he realised that incredibly, she was actually still alive. Her eyes wide and her lips moving without a sound. He asked her, "Who did this to you, madam?" And then, in an effort to help Leticia speak, the inexperienced young officer decided to remove the knife from where it was lodged in her neck.
I feel like I don't care how inexperienced anyone is. I feel like everybody knows that you never pull it out.
A rookie error of fucking biblical proportions. Blood gushed from the wound, splattering everywhere as Leticia herself rapidly faded out of consciousness. Laetitia Toureaux was stretchered out of the metro station and rushed by ambulance to hospital, but tragically died en route. Her lips stilled without being able to name or even describe her assailant. She'd become the very first person to be murdered on the Paris Underground, and the mystery of the metro had officially begun.
From the very start, the police were overwhelmed. Hundreds of potential witnesses had been travelling in the second-class cars, but questioning them swiftly hit a brick wall. Plenty of people remembered Laetitia Toureaux. After all, she was hard to miss. That's what I want people to say about me if and when I'm murdered,
Sure.
rather than lit up a room. Well, I did notice her because she was incredibly chic. That's what I want.
When they were like, oh, they noticed her because of her wide-brimmed white hat. What
No.
would I want? I noticed her because her hair looked a very puffy mess and she had a rather grubby with brown makeup sun hat on her head. I would like people to be like, she was so chic.
And also, like, my chic factor has plummeted since I stopped smoking. No one talks about that.
It's the price you pay. Everything's a trade-off. If you had to place yourself on a day where you make 10 out of 10 effort, how chic would you say you are out of 10?
I don't think I'm a very chic person. I wish, but I just don't think I don't think I'm chic.
Is chic subjective?
Not in France.
Well, yeah, right. But I'm not going to wear a little fucking green suit and a white hat, so we're fucked.
Gonna wear Marge Simpson's pink Chanel suit.
Hey man, that was iconic.
However, everyone agreed on one crucial thing. Letitia, no matter how chic, was completely alone when she stepped into that first-class carriage. Nobody saw anyone get on before her, with her, or after her at Port Charenton. And Port Charenton is at the end of the line, so it would have sat there at the platform for a while before setting off. At Port d'Oreille, not a single soul on the platform saw a potential assassin sprint off the train before the next 6 passengers climbed aboard and walked into a murder scene. Could the killer have struck mid-journey then, slipping between carriages, stabbing Letitia and then vanishing back into the heaving second-class car to blend in with the crowd? Technically, no. The doors between first and second class were locked, which is standard practice on the Paris Métro, and not a single passenger reported seeing anybody move between the cars. Investigators were stumped by what seemed like a classic locked room mystery, a Saruti Bala favourite.
Totally. But I was very put off as you were saying that because I was like, one of the things I despise on the tube, and I've got quite a high tolerance for gross shit on the tube because I don't cycle. So I have to deal with it. So you do just like leave your body a little bit, have a bit of a existential moment where you're just like, I'm not here, this isn't happening. Like I was on the way to the doctor's this morning and there was a man sat next to me who spent 10 minutes coughing, but I couldn't move. And I was just like, sir, for fuck's sake, why? Why are you? And he was open mouth coughing. I was like, you have 2 elbows. Why are you doing this to me?
I was never bothered about germs until COVID. And I really miss that version of myself that didn't care because now I just like imagine germs on things. A friend of mine is a doctor. She was like, never, ever eat on the tube. But I never would have thought of that before. That's how ungermy I was pre-COVID.
Because I've always been quite a germophobic person to the point that Sam will like be doing something and I'll be like, have you washed your hands? He'll like come out of the toilet and I'll be like, did you wash your hands? He'll be like, I'm 38 years old. And I'm like, but did you wash your hands?
But did you wash your hands?
Because I haven't actually had a lot of weird things happen in front of me on the tube. But one of the most unsettling things that happens is when people walk between carriages.
The first time I saw that, I was like, that's against the rules.
Yes. I was like, if he's willing to do that, what else is he willing to do? He could murder us all. Are you all watching this? I'm 5 foot. I can't stop him. Are you ready to fight him? Because he just walked into this carriage from that other carriage while this train was moving. So I wouldn't put it past this killer to have done that.
No, me neither.
But apparently it wasn't possible.
How could they possibly unlock a door?
Obviously, this is kind of a pasto case, so immediately it's quite difficult to know exactly the details of it. But they basically say it's technically not possible, not it's technically against the rules. So they could have done it. I don't know. Was it completely locked? It's hard to know for sure. But they kind of shut down that scope of investigation like it wasn't possible.
Yeah, but they are French.
This is true.
And therefore intrinsically wrong in every way.
So anyway, let's dust off our detecting gear and get into some theories, shall we? Given all the police knew, there were only a few ways this could have gone down. Option 1. The killer struck while the train was still sitting in Port Chanteron station, stabbing Leticia in her seat, then leaping off just before the doors closed. They then left the station before the train had even set off. They had maybe a minute, 2 at the most. Not long, but definitely enough to kill, especially with a single stab wound. Then there's option 2, the same setup. The killer struck while the train was still idling at Port Chanteron and then jumped out onto the platform, so off the first-class carriage, but instead of bolting onto the street, they slipped back onto the train in the second-class carriage, hiding in plain sight among the crowd. And once the train rolled into Port de Rey, they hopped off and disappeared into the night. And finally, option 3. The killer stabbed Leticia on the moving train during the 45-second window between stations, but at Port de Rey, they somehow left the first-class carriage without anyone seeing them and made their escape. 3 theories, none that quite made sense.
The police were hopeful that maybe Leticia's body could yield more clues. The autopsy concluded she'd been killed by a single stab wound behind her right ear, which severed her jugular vein and perforated her carotid artery. Leticia would have been instantly immobilized, unable to scream or react. As she was sitting with her back to the door, it was theorized that she may well have been taken by surprise by someone entering the train after her. The murder weapon, unusually left inside her body, turned out to be a Cagoule model knife, which were generally used in the hospitality sector. It was 9 inches long and had a handle made of bone. There were no fingerprints on the handle, suggesting that the killer wore gloves. And that particular knife could only be bought at 2 specific shops in Paris. But both of them, unfortunately, were large department stores that didn't keep a record of customer purchases. There were no other suspicious marks on Leticia's body, and the sheer force of the blow ruled out suicide straight away. Whoever had done this was strong, almost certainly a man. And the speed, precision, and confidence of the attack, potentially carried out on a moving train, suggested something even darker, the work of a professional killer. It does seem that way. I've been doing this for nearly 10 years and I wouldn't have known. And I kill people all the time.
Quite. Just sloppily.
Sloppily. Do a bad job, they take ages.
Such an unchic killer.
I actually would be such an unchic killer.
Which brings us back to the witnesses, now potential suspects, at the scene. Major Dubray, we're just saying his name differently every time.
The Major.
The dentist Major. His decision to flee without talking to the police certainly raised eyebrows, as well it should. But he had a solid alibi from fellow passengers and also no experience, skill or background that would suggest he was capable of a hit, though I would argue because of his medical training, he did know where the jugular was and would know where to strike. And being a dentist, cold-hearted.
Sadist.
So basically, there's no evidence that he did it. They decided he was just a dickhead dentist who didn't, alert anybody of what he'd found rather than a contract killer.
Mm-hmm.
Over the next year, investigators would grill more than 800 other people who had either been on the metro that day or who were connected to Leticia in her day-to-day life. And still, they failed to come up with a single viable suspect. But one thing was clear. This was no random act of violence. Laetitia Toureaux had been targeted, executed in cold blood. With the crime scene giving up no real answers, investigators only had one place left to look, the victim herself.
So who was Laetitia Toureaux? And we don't just mean the person her workmates and dance partners thought they knew. We're talking about the juicy bits, the secrets that she would have preferred to keep hidden. Investigators began to piece together a life that on the surface looked respectable. She was born Laetitia Marie Josephine Nourrisat on the 11th of September 1907 in the tiny town Oyas, tucked away in the alpine peaks of Italy's Valle d'Aosta. It's a place where French and Italian cultures collide, and even the local dialect is a mashup of the two.
I think I watched an episode of Rick Stein when he went there.
I like him. Psychopath. I like him, though.
He's no Keith Floyd. Is Keith dead? He was always hammered. I feel like he's dead. Yeah. 2009. Oh my God, he's been dead for ages.
Oh, Jesus.
Fucking sad. A kid should just eat out on that shit. He's still on there every week. I watched him flambe something literally last week. He's been dead for 15 years.
Leticia came from an ordinary working class family. Her dad was a farmer and construction worker who fought for Italy in the First World War. But Leticia herself was destined to be anything but ordinary. In 1920, teenage Leticia moved to France with her mum Marie and her 3 siblings. Controversially, for the era, Leticia's parents split up, with her dad Henri staying in Italy and the rest of them going to France. After a short stay in Lyon, the family made the jump up to gay Paris when Leticia was 18, chasing work, excitement, and a fresh start in the city of love.
And romance is exactly what Leticia found, waiting for her in the capital. She started working at a pottery factory, and across the crowded workshop floor, she fell head over heels for the owner's son, Sylvain Jules Toureaux. It was a classic Romeo and Juliet scenario. Jules was a part of the old-school French bourgeoisie, and she was a working-class immigrant. But it was for real. Jules and Leticia tied the knot in 1929, with one slight catch. The marriage had to be kept completely secret from Jules' snobby parents. So, while their union was legal, Jules kept Leticia hidden away like a mistress in a fancy apartment that he'd bought in secret, while he still officially lived with his folks. It was unconventional, to say the least. But the lovebirds seemed to make it work. Leticia adored dancing at the bal musettes, unpretentious venues where working-class Parisians, many of them Italians, let loose to the folksy sounds of live orchestras. The bals didn't exactly have a squeaky clean reputation, however, with links to gangs, sex works, and pearl-clutching activities like homosexuality. They were viewed with suspicion by the upper classes as bohemian dens of iniquity. But when Leticia introduced her high-class beau to the bal musette scene, well, Jules bloody loved it. The pair were reportedly mad for each other, dancing till dawn and staying faithful to one another all through their marriage.
But this fairy tale romance was doomed to be short-lived. In 1935, after just 6 years of wedded bliss, Jules fell ill with either TB or throat cancer. On his deathbed, he finally confessed to his parents about his marriage to Leticia, and they were not happy about it. Once Jules popped his clogs, the Toureaux refused to accept Leticia as his widow, and they barred her from his will. All she got was a couple of pieces of furniture and a small sum of money, and French citizenship. But the biggest blow for Leticia wasn't losing the bougie lifestyle, it was losing Jules. She was devastated by his death and mainly wore black for the 2 years afterward, far longer than was customary for widows. She also visited Jules's grave every Sunday, although, interestingly, not on the day she died.
Still, Leticia wasn't the sort of woman to curl up and wallow in grief. She kept on hustling, determined to make her own money and climb the social ladder. In November 1936, she started working at a glue factory called Laboratoire Maxi. Leticia was diligent, competent, and quickly impressed her bosses, moving up from slapping labels on jars to showing off the company's products at expos. She got on well with her colleagues, and nobody had a bad word to say about her. Meanwhile, Leticia also picked up shifts at various bal musettes across the city. These included Le Lotus in the Latin Quarter, or Le Petit Balcon on the Rue de Lappe, a notorious red light district, and the Ace of Hearts, where she worked until she died. Leticia was hired officially to work in the cloakroom, but the role also involved dancing with lonely male patrons who could purchase special tokens to dance with staff members. Might sound a bit seedy to us, but it was pretty common in the 1930s Paris nightclub scene for both male and female workers to fill in as dance partners for a little extra pocket money.
When it came to her personal life, those close to Leticia had nothing but praise for her. Her mum Marie described her as a spirit of joy, while her dad back in Italy called her his only joy in life. His other kids had cut ties with him after moving to France, but Leticia still went to Italy to visit him every year. She was devoted to her family, with her little brother gushing that they were each other's true friend, and she doted on her sister Simone's little girl. Her kindness even extended to looking after poor children in her neighbourhood. Far from a cold, mysterious femme fatale, Leticia seemed like the girl next door, never too busy to stop for a chat. Investigators searched her one-bedroom apartment and found it to be more or less what they expected. Small, humble, no running water, but stylishly decorated with that inherited furniture from her marriage. A few things, however, raised eyebrows. In Leticia's handbag was a book full of first-class train tickets. Unusual for someone of her working-class background. Some even speculated that these tickets may have been related to sex work. Ladies of the night were known to cruise first-class train cars for customers. But there's no real evidence to support that, though. And Leticia's mum offered a simple explanation. Occasionally, Leticia treated herself to first-class travel to protect her nice clothes, especially when she was wearing her Sunday best. But then, in Leticia's apartment, they found a treasure trove of love letters from various men that opened up a whole new avenue of investigation.
Because let's just say that Laetitia Toureaux was one popular gal.
Of course, she's so chic.
While she was still heartbroken over Jules's death, she'd had her fair share of romantic entanglements in the past few years. Love letters found in her flat revealed that at the time of her death, she was involved with 2 military men, both stationed outside Paris, René Schramm and Jean Martin. Schramm was a plumber in his civil life and met Leticia at a bal musette in 1936. They quickly became lovers before he was sent to the Maguignan line for his service. Leticia's most recent side piece was a sailor, Jean Martin, who was stationed at the port of Toulon. They'd only recently met, but they were keen to keep seeing each other. In fact, a note found in Leticia's handbag showed that she'd planned to hook up with him after the gala on the night she died. But Martin's commanding officer confirmed that he hadn't secured leave, so the meeting never would have happened. Schramm also had a solid alibi from his commanding officer, so neither of Leticia's lovers were actually in Paris that weekend at all.
Still, the police hoped her personal entanglements might shed light on her private world. Investigators found evidence of flings with a Renault dealer, a married Italian barman, and another mysterious wealthy lover. But all of Leticia's documented beaux had alibis for the night of her death. And while the scandalous details of her sex life may well have shocked the buttoned-up public, they ultimately weren't felt to be significant when it came to her murder. Because, like we said, this had all the hallmarks of a cold-blooded political assassination. It was baffling why an ordinary red-blooded girl like Leticia would be a target for such a hit. That is, until a man called Georges Ruffignac, a rotund, mustachioed figure who reportedly looked exactly like Hercule Poirot, came out of the woodwork. Ruffignac claimed that he had employed Leticia as an operative for his private detective firm. And that means Laetitia Toureaux was the chicest thing of all, a spy.
Standing out too much, though, to be a spy. Definitely don't want people noticing you being like, she was so chic, she was hard to miss. She's like hired to do this, right? Because she's got skills to make her good at this. But I think she thinks spy means glamorous.
Yeah, that's what we all were told.
Georges Ruffignac insisted to the press that he'd only ever hired Leticia for low-level assignments like tailing adulterous wives.
I think being a spy for a private investigator is not as cool as doing it for a nation state.
No.
But then I don't know why I feel that way, because I'm not a patriot.
Well, it's just not as cool.
Yeah.
It's just not.
I don't make the rules.
No, it's not cool. But we suspect that Ruffignac was telling porkies here. He was inconsistent with his statements to the media about Leticia, sometimes saying she was clearly an accomplished sleuth outside of his small-time agency, while other times claiming she was just a sloppy amateur. And while he said he'd only hired her for 6 minor jobs, it emerged that she'd actually undertaken at least 16 assignments on his behalf over the course of a year. So yes, definitely lying. Ruffignac seemed keen to create distance between his agency and Laetitia Toureaux, which sort of made sense, since she was France's most infamous murder victim. And he clearly wanted the public to swallow the idea that his business was just related to petty domestic dramas rather than anything deeper. But this, quelle surprise, was far from the truth.
In fact, Ruffignac hadn't just employed Leticia to catch naughty spouses. He was actually the one who engineered her place at the maxi factory where she worked. In the summer of 1936, general strikes crippled French industry and sparked a wave of pro-communist sympathies in the country. Basically, the 1% were shitting themselves that another revolution was on the cards. Factory owner, Monsieur Dalit, had recently sacked a female employee for stirring up trouble amongst the workers and was looking for a less rebellious replacement. Ruffignac offered up Leticia to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, to be a reliable worker, whilst also keeping an eye on her colleagues for any rumblings of unionisation. So, as it turned out, Leticia wasn't just screwing lids on glue bottles, she was screwing over her colleagues as well.
It was also Ruffignac who got Leticia her job at the Ace of Hearts nightclub. Undercover as party girl Yolanda, her position in the cloakroom provided the perfect opportunity to intercept sensitive letters and witness people in compromising situations. Leticia apparently loved moonlighting as a private detective. She reportedly told her close friend Marie that she loved how the work enabled her to make connections with people in high places and make something of herself. So, keen to ingratiate herself into the upper echelons of French society, Leticia's ambition didn't stop at union gossip. It dragged her deep into the shadowy world of political terrorism, which was brewing under the surface of interwar France.
So, historical context. In the 1930s, France was run by a socialist government called the Popular Front. But their position was quite precarious, with unrest brewing on all sides. Fascists and extreme right groups squared off against communists, and Paris witnessed violent riots in 1934. By 1936, a series of strikes ground production lines to a halt. And let's not forget, fascism was booming just next door in Spain and Italy. We tend to think of neighbourhood spying as a Cold War thing, like curtain twitchers dobbing in their neighbours to the KGB for not taking out the bins on time. But with the political landscape more unstable than ever, interwar Europe took intelligence pretty seriously as well. Mussolini's Italy was keen to keep tabs on its citizens living abroad, particularly within the Val d'Italie community that Leticia came from, since they historically tended to be less fascist-minded than most in the old country. And the French police were just as jittery about the rising of political extremism. They routinely used paid informants, often women, to infiltrate political groups that they couldn't reach themselves. In short, plain-clothed political spies were everywhere in 1930s Paris, and Laetitia Toureaux was one of them.
Remember that lapel pin Leticia was wearing when she died?
Oh my god. Was it a microphone? A camera?
No, sadly not.
Poison dart.
Just so much more boring now what I'm going to say. It was for the Republican League for the Public Good, as you told us earlier, Hannah, which is, at the time, a well-respected left-leaning public service organisation. It had been founded by two prominent socialists, and it aimed to fight the spread of fascism in France. On the surface, Leticia's membership might not have seemed that unusual, but the League required sponsorship to join. And who were Leticia's two sponsors? None other than her spying boss, Georges Ruffignac, and a high-ranking police officer named Inspector Toureaux. Just like Ruffignac placing her at the Maxi factory, the French police were using Leticia to inform on any communist rumblings within this league. So it was just actually a pin that she wore. Inspector Toureaux later admitted that Leticia had been a police informant since her teenage years, when she first came to Paris, as had her seamstress mother. Deeply embedded in the Italian immigrant community, they were an incredibly valuable source of information for the French police.
As for Leticia's personal politics, they're a bit of a mystery. While she stepped out on the day of her death proudly toting a socialist pin, investigators found that letters in her apartment indicated right-wing views. Her friend Yvonne Carriages later told the press that Leticia was absolutely a fascist. But regardless of where her own sympathies lay, it ultimately seemed like Leticia's espionage work was motivated largely by money and social climbing. Her trade was secrets. It didn't matter what side they came from. And we know that because, as well as informing from inside left-wing circles, Leticia's biggest and most dangerous assignment took her to the extreme right of France's political spectrum, infiltrating a terrorist group called La Cagoule. Le anorak.
Yeah.
Le raincoat.
Mac.
That was the word I was looking
Mac
for.
in a bag.
Mac in a bag. Mac in a sack.
Mac in a sack.
Cag in a bag.
Now you might be thinking, isn't that an anorak that your nan makes you wear when it starts drizzling outside?
Gives you flashbacks to Duke of Edinburgh trauma.
Quite. Well, you're halfway there. The group we're talking about actually called themselves CASR, the French initials for Secret Committee of Revolutionary Action. But their nickname, Le Cagoule, came from the French word for hood, apparently because the members would disguise their identities with black or red hoods, so basically the KKK en français. And they had a reason to hide their faces. Le Cagoule wasn't your average gang of angry, beard-up street thugs. Their leaders included ex-army officers, engineers, doctors, and industrialists, and many were from France's poshest families. The group was bankrolled by huge names like Michelin, L'Oreal, and Leticia Oil, with plenty of high-ranking friends inside the French military. Anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-democratic, and anti-Semitist, and anti-Semitic to boot, Le Cagoule's primary aim was to overthrow the Popular Front government and replace it with a fascist-style dictatorship based on the Italian model. Their ultimate goal after that? The re-establishment of the French monarchy. And how exactly did they plan to make all this happen? The answer is simple. terrorism.
Le Cagoule used terrorist tactics in the hope of creating a helter-skelter-style collapse of the current regime. On September the 11th, 1937, very ironic date, they bombed 2 buildings in Paris's wealthy 16th arrondissement, making it look like the communists were to blame. Essentially, they wanted to trigger a moral panic against the Reds, kick off a civil war, and then save the day with a military coup. Cagoule members secretly trained militias and built up massive stockpiles of weapons both in Paris and the French provinces. They carried out multiple political assassinations, both on their own enemies and on behalf of Mussolini's fascist secret police, in a you scratch my back and I'll execute your enemy sort of way, in a return for arms shipments. And operating in the shadows, they were truly dangerous.
So how did Laetitia Toureaux come into this murky picture? Investigators learned that at some point in 1936, she became the lover of a guy called Gabriel Jonté, Le Cagoule's arms smuggling expert. Jonté ran a garage near Montmartre, commanding a fleet of cars used to smuggle weapons from Geneva to Paris. He was an upper-crust type with a soft spot for slumming it at the Bal Musettes, which is probably where he met Leticia, or should we say, Yolanda. Using her feminine charms, Leticia snuck her way into the heart of Cagoule operations, most likely picking up more than a few morsels of gossip during pillow talk. And that terrorist tea was piping hot.
Because around this time, it's now believed that Le Cagoule was plotting the murders of several high-profile socialist figures. One of these was Russian economist and advisor to the French government, Dmitry Navashin. He was stabbed to death on the 26th of January 1937 whilst taking his dog out on a morning stroll in the Bois de Boulogne Park in Paris. That's bold, assassinating someone with a dog.
We don't know what type of dog, though.
That's very true. And then there were the Rosselli brothers, Carlo and Nello, both prominent anti-fascist Italian activists. Just a few weeks after Leticia's death, the brothers were gunned down in broad daylight by Le Cagoule assassins, whilst they were visiting the French seaside town of Ballon-de-Lyon in Normandy.
After almost a year of brick walls, the answers finally started to tumble out in early 1938. The French authorities exposed and dismantled Le Cagoule following a failed coup in November 1937. In January, one of the arrested members, a Michelin engineer named René Lockety, revealed that his superiors in Le Cagoule claimed responsibility for Leticia's murder. Slowly, a picture of Leticia's downfall began to emerge. By spring 1937, Leticia's cover had grown thin. Le Cagoule suspected that she was a rat and hatched a plan to flush her out. And in a very Agatha Christie-style move, they leaked fake details of a cross-border arms run to her, and Leticia walked right into the trap by tipping off the French police. When the car was stopped at the Swiss border, it was empty, but it let Le Cagoule know for certain that Laetitia Toureaux was not to be trusted. Senior Cagoule leadership allegedly met on the 10th of May 1937, just 6 days before Leticia was found bleeding on the metro floor, and it was then that they sentenced her to death.
The real question is, did Leticia know that she was running out of time? While her brother insisted that she was her usual happy-go-lucky self on her last day alive, in retrospect, there were some troubling signs. For one, Leticia had told a few friends and relatives that a stranger attempted to attack her just 3 days earlier. On the 13th of May, a man approached her with a knife outside her apartment building, but she slapped him and the concierge let her in before any damage was done. When she relayed that story to a Metro Guard acquaintance, Leticia laughed it off and insisted that she now carried an umbrella to fight off any potential assailants. She didn't even report the incident to the police. Leticia didn't seem to be taking it seriously, but perhaps she was secretly more nervous than she let on. And whilst dancing with her friend Marceau at Le Hermitage on that fateful Sunday, Leticia made the cryptic comment, "I'm laughing now, but I won't be laughing tonight because I don't expect things to go well." She even tried to get Marceau's little sister to walk with her to the metro station, which was massively out of character. She travelled every day on her own, without fear. The bus driver who took Leticia to Port Charenton also noted that she seemed rushed and anxious, unlike her usual self.
And then there was the unusual way that Leticia had dressed that day. And she'd also, remember, dyed her hair blonde and was sporting brighter colours than she'd worn for the past 2 years as a grieving widow dressed in black. Was this Leticia, afraid for her life, attempting to disguise herself? Or, on the flip side, was she deliberately trying to stand out? Many witnesses remembered Leticia's pin badge, indicating she was a member of the Republican League of the Public Good. But she'd never worn this pin before. And in fact, it wasn't even clear how she'd got it, since she hadn't been a member for long enough to earn one.
It's not very socialist.
Was this a deliberately chosen accessory?
Perform better.
Designed to...
Do you want this reward?
Everyone gets one, don't worry. Was this a deliberately chosen accessory, therefore? Designed to identify her? To a contact, maybe? Perhaps someone in the French police? who she desperately hoped could help her escape the increasingly sticky web of the Cagoule. Unfortunately for her, though, the French police themselves had been infiltrated by Cagoule double agents. If Leticia was trying to reach help, she may have been set up and lured straight to her death by someone sworn to serve and protect her.
So now comes the 1 million franc question. Who actually plunged the knife into Laetitia Toureaux's neck? A Cagoule grunt called Ferdinand Jacubiers claimed that Letitia was stalked by their operatives for weeks. They sussed out her daily routines before pointing her out to the group's top assassin, a guy called Jean Filion. And he was one scary motherfucker, a mad dog hitman notorious for brutal executions and terrifying acts of violence on the streets of Paris. If anyone had the skill, audacity, and downright sociopathy to pull off the attack on Letitia in the middle of a crowded metro, it was him. In 1938, Inspector Charles Chevenier wrote in his final report that the trail of evidence in Laetitia Toureaux's death led directly to La Cagoule. So, mystery solved. Not quite.
In their 2010 book on the case, historians Annette Finley Crosswhite and Gail K. Brunel came to the intriguing conclusion that another group was actually more likely to have bumped off Laetitia Toureaux. And that group was Mussolini's secret police force, OVRA, the Italian precursor to the Gestapo. They speculate that Busy Bee Leticia may have actually been a triple agent.
That's chic.
Also, you gotta sell a book. You gotta have a new theory. It wasn't La Cagoule at all. Let's look at this theory before I, poo-poo it too much. This is what they thought. That alongside Leticia's work as a paid informant for the French police, she was allegedly leaking to Mussolini's secret service as well. Leticia had visited Italy several times in the past few years, apparently to see her father. But on more than one of these trips, she also went to the Italian embassy. With her personal fascist views, plum position within the Italian immigrant community, and access to several political groups on both sides of the political coin in France, Leticia would have been the perfect candidate for this risky triple cross. Finley, Crosswhite and Brunel also based their theory on the style of Leticia's murder. It didn't quite match Mad Dog Jean Filiol's signature method, a sawed-off bayonet that left a distinctive triangular wound. And the fact that the dagger was still inside the victim, they argue, is more indicative of an old-school Italian contract kill. Their calling card was a stiletto folding knife, left in the body as a chilling signature. But while this scholarly pair have dedicated years of research to the Metro murder case, even they admit it's impossible to say for certain who did the deed. There's only one thing we can all agree on. Laetitia Toureaux played a deadly game and ended up paying the ultimate price. That also does remind me of the other day when I was on the tube. Across the tube seat from me, there was just one singular playing card.
Stop it.
A King of Hearts face up, and it was like perfectly positioned on the seat. And I was like, oh my God, do I pick it up? But I can't pick it up because I'll look mad. And it's probably really dirty.
Despite all of the questions still surrounding Letitia's death, the Paris police closed the case in 1938 as officially unsolved.
It's when they're like, we've completely cleared these people. How?
The Second World War. That's how and why. As Europe hurtled towards conflict, priorities shifted, understandably so. By the time Paris fell and the Vichy government came to power in 1940, the authorities had much bigger fish to fry than digging through dusty old case files. And it's not like there was anyone really left to charge. Upon the outbreak of war, most Cagoule members, including Letitia's suspected assassin, were released from prison and mobilised to fight for France. Jean Filiol, the assassin, ended up in the Milice, a brutal squad that hunted and tortured political prisoners opposing the Vichy regime, while other Cagoule members actually rebranded as resistance heroes. The case against La Cagoule didn't even go to trial until 1948, and by then most of the group's major players had either emerged as unlikely war heroes or fled to Spain, like Jean Filiol had. He scored a cushy job with L'Oréal and spent the rest of his days in San Sebastian as a wealthy and presumably very moist happy man. It's quite good, isn't it? Brutal calling card assassin working for L'Oréal until he dies. Very few Cagoule members faced any real comeuppance, and presumably quite a lot of them died in the war. But it also does pay to have friends in high, moist places.
Mm-hmm. And so Laetitia Toureaux's story was pretty much forgotten for years. But then, in 1962, it was resurrected when the Paris police received an anonymous letter from a man claiming to be Leticia's killer. And this guy wasn't a spy or a terrorist. He was a jilted lover. He wrote a rambling yet strangely compelling account of how he met Leticia in November 1936. When he had been a young medical student. He claimed to have courted Leticia for a while, but she didn't really take his devotion seriously. and treated him like a child with a crush. On the day of Leticia's murder, he'd apparently asked her to dinner, but when she said she had to cancel, growing jealous, he accused her of seeing another man, which prompted Leticia to admit that she was indeed going to meet up with her sailor man, Jean Martin, instead. The man claimed that he'd spent hours in a fury that later settled into a cold rage. Having gone to the Bal Musette, where he correctly thought Leticia might be, he tailed her to the Port Chanteron station in his car. He followed her on board the first-class carriage and called her name as she sat down, and when Leticia turned in surprise, he plunged a knife into her neck. In a state of shock, the man said he returned to the platform and quickly slipped into the second-class carriage just before it departed the station. When Leticia's body was discovered at Port de Rey, he was ushered off with the other second-class passengers and made to wait for around an hour. He said in the letter that he felt that everyone was staring at him, and he had no idea how nobody seemed to have noticed how freaked out he was. He was also never questioned by the police and was eventually allowed to leave. Accidentally, he claimed, getting away with the perfect murder.
Some people are convinced by this letter, but not me. Letitia's killing smacks of calculated, professional hitman stuff. It's not the outburst of a rejective suitor in the spur of the moment. And how would you know to stab her behind the ear?
He was a medical student.
Not a good one. I checked. Wouldn't know a jugular if it knocked him in the face. But as with so many elements of this baffling story, we're never gonna know. Curiously, all files related to this case were sealed just before the war broke out. And they will stay that way for a whopping 101 years, only to be opened in 2038, long after everyone involved has kicked the bucket. Stole that one right off the White House, didn't they? Fucking hell. So, the powers that be in French society might want us to view the Laetitia Toureaux affair as a long-buried cold case that will just never be solved. But we don't know about you, but sealing the archives and insisting that there's absolutely nothing to see for a century, that does seem a bit suspicious. So, what could possibly be in there that would be so damning to future leaders? It's complicated and has a lot to do with legacy.
According to our historians Findlay, Crosswaith and Brunel, Laetitia Toureaux's story forms part of the larger French refusal to come to terms with the pre-World War II era, when many French sympathised with extreme far-right politics, fascism and anti-Semitism. Basically, throughout those tumultuous years, France liked to think of itself as firmly being on the side of the goodies, and it stayed that way. Later politicians weren't exactly keen to admit that there had been homegrown fascists kicking around even before the Nazis came to be. So, Le Cagoule's reign of terror and the group's ties to the infamous murder on the Metro was an inconvenient truth, better off shoved in the junk cupboard of history. So hey, maybe we'll see you in 13 years' time when the files are finally unsealed.
The fact that 2038 is only 13 years away is disgusting.
Gross. But if that does happen, maybe we can crack open those bad boys together.
No, I'll be long dead like the Cagoules.
Until then, we leave you with what is, at least officially, a perplexing mystery. We don't do Paso cases very often because they are a fucking nightmare to research. But that one just, it was worthy of the time. There is just one two-parter left to see off our year. And it is on none other than Mr. O.J. Simpson. The juice is loose.
The juice is certainly loose in my brain.
Yes. And we will see you next week for part 1. Goodbye.
Bye.